A Treatise of Satan's Temptations. By Richard Gilpin. A Discourse of the Malice, Power, Cruelty and Diligence of Satan. Sixth part of Chapter 17. Satan's deceits against religious services and duties. The grounds of his displeasure against religious duties, and more. 6. Sixthly, Satan picks quarrels in men, at the manner of performance of duty. When duty cannot be spoken against, then he endeavors to destroy it by the modes, circumstances, and way of performance, as, 1. If those that act in them discover any weakness, as who doth not, when he hath done his best. This he endeavors to blemish the duty withal. The bodily presence of Paul was objected against him, as being contemptible, and his speech as weak, 2 Corinthians 10:10. But the design of that objection lay higher, the devil thereby endeavoring to render the duties of his ministry as contemptible, and not to be regarded. 2. If the circumstances please not, he teacheth them to take pet with the substance, and, like children, to reject all, because everything is not suitable to their wills. 3. If it be managed in any way not grateful to their expectations, if too cuttingly and plain, then they think they be justified to say they hate it, as Ahab did Micaiah. If any way too high or abstrusely, then likewise they fling off. On this point the devil persuaded many of Christ's followers to desert him, John 6:66, because he had spoken of himself in comparisons that they judged too high. When he said he was that bread that came down from heaven, verse 58, they said that was a saying not to be borne, and on that occasion they went back, and walked no more with him. 7. Seventhly, the devil brings a nauseating of the duties of worship, by a wrong representation of them, in the carriage and gestures of those that engage in them. It seems strange to some that are but as idle spectators to observe the postures of saints, seriously lifting up their eyes to heaven, or humbly mourning and smiting on their breasts. These the devil would render ridiculous, and as the suspicious managements of an histrionical or hypocritical devotion, as men at a distance, beholding the strange variety of actions and postures of such as dance, being out of the sound of their music, shall think them a company of madmen and frantic people. Such perverse prospects doth he sometimes afford to those that come rather to observe what others do, than to concern themselves in such duties, that, not seeing their private influences, nor the secret spring that moves them, they judge them foolish, and from thence they contract an inward loathing of the duties themselves. 5. Fifthly, in order to the hindering or preventing of duty, Satan useth to impose upon men by fallacious arguings, and by a piece of 114 his sophistry he endeavors to cheat them out of their services. I shall note some of his remarkable dealings in this kind, as 1. First, he heightens the dignity of God's children, upon a design to spoil their duty. He tells them they are partakers of the divine nature, 2 Peter 1:4, that they are in God and Christ, and have the communications of his Spirit, and therefore they need not now drink of the cistern, seeing they enjoy the fountain, and that these services, in their attainments, are as useless as scaffolds are when once the house is built. To prosecute this he takes advantage, 1. Of the natural pride of their hearts. He puffs them up with conceits, of the excellency of their condition, a thing which all men are apt to catch at with greediness upon the least imaginary grounds, 1 Corinthians 8:7. Colossians 2:18. If a man have but a little knowledge, or have attained to any vain speculations, he is presently apt to be vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. The same hazard attends any conceited excellency which a man apprehends he hath reached unto. Those monsters of religion, mentioned by Peter and Jude, that made no other use of the grace of God but to turn it into wantonness, Jude 4. Yet were they so tumefied with the apprehensions of their privileges, that whilst they designed no other thing than plain licentiousness and a wantonness, in the lusts of the flesh, yet it seems they encouraged themselves and allured others from a supposed liberty which their privileges gave them. And to this purpose had frequently in their mouths great swelling words of vanity, 2 Peter 2:18, even whilst they walked after their own lusts, Jude 16. 2. To strengthen their proud conceits, the devil improves what the Scriptures speak of, the differences of God's children, that some are spiritual, some are carnal. Some weak, others strong, some perfect, some less perfect, some little children, some young men, some fathers, 1 Corinthians 2:1. Philippians 3:15. 1 John 2:12-13. The end of all this is to make them apprehend themselves Christians of a higher rank and order, which also makes way consequently for a further inference, viz., that there must needs be immunities and privileges suitable to these heights and attainments. To this purpose, 3. He produceth those scriptures that are designed by God to raise up the minds of men to look after the internal work and power of His ordinances, and not to center their minds and hopes in the bare formal use of them, without applying their thoughts to God and Christ, unto whom they are appointed to lead us. Such as these scriptures, Romans 2:28, He is not a Jew which is one outwardly. Neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter. And Romans 6:7, we should serve in newness of spirit, and not in the oldness of the letter. 2 Corinthians 5:16, wherefore henceforth know we no man after the flesh, yea, though we have known Christ after the flesh, yet now henceforth know we him no more. Ephesians 4:13, he gave some apostles, and some prophets, for the perfecting of the saints, till we all come in the unity of the faith, and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man. By a perverse interpretation of these, and some other scriptures of like import, he would persuade them, that the great thing that Christ designed by his ordinances, was but to train up the weaker Christians by these rudiments, as the ABC to children, to a more spiritual and immediate way of living upon God. And that these become altogether useless when Christians have gotten up to any of these imaginary degrees of a supposed perfection. Enough of this may be seen in the writings of Saltmarsh, Winstanley, and others, in the late times. How great a trade Satan drove by such misapprehensions not long since cannot easily be forgotten, so that God's worship did almost lie waste, and in many places the way to Zion did mourn. 2. Secondly, he will sometimes confess an equality of privilege among the children of God, and yet plead an inequality of duty. That God is as good and strong to us, and that we have all an equal advantage by Christ, he will readily acknowledge, but then, when we should propound the diligence of the saints in their services for our pattern, as of David's praying 7 times a day, Daniel's 3 times, Anna's serving God with fastings and prayers night and day, he tells us these were extraordinary services, and as it were works of supererogation, more than the command of God laid upon them. So that we are not tied to such strictness. And we, being naturally apt to indulge ourselves in our own ease, are too ready to comply with such delusions. And by degrees men are thus brought to a confident belief that they may be good enough, and do as much as is required, though they slacken their pace, and do not fast, pray, or hear so often as others have done. 3. Thirdly, another sophism of his is to heighten one duty, to the ruin of another. He strives to make an intestine war among the several parts of the services we owe to God. And from the excellency of one, to raise up an enmity and undervaluing disregard of another. Thus would he sever as inconsistent those things that God hath joined together. As among false teachers, some say, Lo, here is Christ, and others, Lo, he is there. So we find Satan dealing with duties. He puts some upon such high respects to preaching, that, say they, Christ is to be found here most frequently, rather than in prayer or other ordinances. Others are made to have the like esteem for prayer, and they affirm in this is Christ especially to be met withal. Others say the like of sacraments or meditation. In all these Satan labors to beget a dislike and neglect of other services. Thus, in what relates to the constitution of churches, he endeavors to set up purity of churches, to the destruction of unity, or unity to the ruin of purity. A notable example hereof we have in the Euchite, a sect of praying heretics, which arose in the time of Valentinian and Valens, who, upon the pretense of the commands of Christ and Paul for praying continually, or without ceasing and fainting, own no other duty as necessary. Vilifying preaching and sacraments as things at best useless and unprofitable. The like attempts he makes daily upon men, where though he prevail not so far as, to bring some necessary duties of service into open contempt, yet he carries them into too much secret neglect and disregard. Luke 18:1. 1 Thessalonians 15:17. Thanks.